and the Israelis should be doing right now is figuring out how they get back this younger generation of Americans and really international people that if you go on TikTok for a couple of minutes, your feed is going to have all sorts of videos coming in from Gaza, coming in from southern Lebanon, that's going to show bombs and bloodshed and that sort of thing. And that's a challenge because the Israelis have lost a lot of that support. According to Pew Research, about 60% of Americans have an unfavorable opinion on Israel right now. Those lobbyists from AIPAC, they should also be figuring out how do they help the Americans and how do they help the Israelis figure out what is going to be the cost of peace, what is our end state, what's our mission, and what do we actually need to do to come up with a long-term solution to the Middle East. Is it a two-state solution? Is it bringing in more possibilities? So, for example, what we're seeing now is the Lebanese and the Israelis are finally coming together. Their ambassadors are actually talking to each other. They realize that Hezbollah is their common enemy. That's the way this is going to be solved. And for 47 years, the Americans have been doing funding. They've been trying to do sanctions. They've been trying to do all sorts of things against their enemies and the Israeli enemies. But what did that bring us? It brought us to this war right now and a negotiation and right now an MOU that isn't a whole lot better than it was a couple of months ago before all this started. So I think it's a lack of policy and it's a lack of really America and Israel coming together for long-term solutions of how do we actually fix this instead of just continuing to fight.
Understood, Mark. Michaela, let's talk about the tone, the texture, the very essence of this US-Israeli alliance. I wonder if we can really, after some of the fruity, granular, salty, I think you call it in the US, language that's been used by Donald Trump, whether you can still call it a healthy relationship. Because let's bring in some of the things recently said. Here they are on the wall. Take a look. Your expletive crazy. I'm saving your expletive. You'd be in prison if not for me. Everybody hates you. Everybody hates Israel because of this. I mean, I don't know about you, Mark.
When I get on the phone with my best friend, we have a talk like that sometimes, right? And I think that's part of the thing that makes a relationship strong, and that's going to test it as well over the long term. I think that what you're seeing is Trump's lack of patience in this entire situation. He sent the U.S. carriers 14,000 different targets against Iran, and still the regime is there. He's seeing gas prices go up. He's seeing inflation go up. He's going to the G7 this week, and all those fellow world leaders are looking him in the eye and saying, what are you doing here?
Michaela, I mean, another thing we don't actually have on the wall there, but he, Netanyahu, won't have any choice. This is Donald Trump, of course. I call the shots. I call all the shots. He, Netanyahu, doesn't call the shots. I know it's in both sides' interest to kind of play up the friction here, but does that actually sound like someone who's confident in their role as the senior partner?
I think we're dealing with two alpha males here. And so, of course, they're both going to have, you know, arms up, chest out. And I just think that's where we're at. I think that's why we have the rhetoric that we just discussed from Trump, and then you see, you know, the same type of rhetoric coming from Netanyahu. These are two very strong leaders who are very strong-willed and strong-minded, and they probably clash when it comes to figuring out what these solutions are. So, of course, Trump is going to be like, hey, bro, I'm saving you. I'm doing you a favor. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's like, who are you to tell me who, you know, what am I doing? And at the end of the day, they both know that they have to come together if we are going to find a solution for this, and I do think that that's what we're going to see on Friday.
Let's turn the lens on the other side of the political aisle, because this isn't just a Republican civil war. We're seeing groups like Track AIPAC and Justice Democrats endorsing over 100 primary challengers who pledged to reject pro-Israel donations. Let me play you this clip. All right, so that's a recent convention in Michigan where moderate candidate Haley Stevens was, as you can hear, loudly booed for taking AIPAC money. Michaela, Mark, I mean, if Netanyahu's lost his bipartisan leverage and the Democratic base is overwhelmingly shifting against this unconditional support for Israel, how can any future administration, whether it's red, whether it's blue, maintain this historic so-called Washington Wall, that absolute alignment with Israel?
Well, I think that if there's a problem with absolute alignment with Israel in both parties, then that means that this whole Israel influence idea isn't going to be a threat for much longer. And we can actually focus on other things domestically and other things that our politicians are doing other than what they would like to see or what they're supporting overseas. I think that taking AIPAC money is no different than taking big pharmaceutical money, taking big tobacco money, taking climate groups money or technology money, energy groups' money. I think everybody has interest, and all these groups pour a lot of money into ensuring that representatives who they support are going to, support whatever their interests are. AIPAC happens to be a large lobbying group with a lot of support, and they go around and recruit and ask, hey, can we count on you to help support our initiatives? Every politician has the right to say yes or no.
These initiatives are highly problematic, though, aren't they, Mark?
And every politician has the right to say yes or no, in which case, if they say yes and somebody has a problem with it, we'll see them getting voted out.
Okay.
And if that continues to be a trend, then again, this whole Israel issue won't be as big of an issue as we're making it now, and we'll be able to focus on other things like energy and agriculture. Yeah.
That is the hope. Mark?
I think that AIPAC and the Israelis have a lot of work to do. Amongst Democrats, the unfavorable rate is about 80% right now for Israel. And that means that money can do a lot, but it can't buy you what it needs, which is a relationship between the two countries that is sustaining. They need each other. The Israelis and the U.S. need each other. The U.S. needs countries in that region. And especially what we see, likely what's going to happen after this negotiation happens over the next 60 days, America doesn't have a lot of leverage right now. The other thing that's going on is both of these two leaders, Trump and Netanyahu, they have big elections coming up in November. When you have a Democratic society like you do in the United States and Israel, you have to listen to your people.
All right, well, on that note, it's really good to hear from both of you. What an interesting take on where we are with American democracy. Michaela Montgomery, conservative activist and political commentator, and Mark Feifley, Republican strategist and former White House Deputy National Security Advisor. Well, that's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. Handing back to Rosalind Jordan and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. See you soon.
Thanks, Neve. Now, don't forget, you can catch this episode or any of our previous ones on our YouTube channel. Al Jazeera English is the search phrase. Now, you can catch a new episode on Wednesday at 18:30 GMT. That's 2:30 p.m. Eastern here in the U.S. But for now, from all the team, thanks for watching.
When the Taliban arrived first in Afghanistan, life for the women of Afghanistan stopped completely. It's about their rights, not to go to school, to have a job, nothing. Right now, there is an apartheid going against women. This is my last resort to throw my scarf on the ground and tell the Taliban that, for God's sakes, do something.
Nanawati, The Last Negotiation, on Al Jazeera.
In Lebanon, Human Appeal supports families displaced by crisis. In these difficult times, we've helped thousands find dignity and hope. The crisis continues. Join us today to make a difference.
High-profile interviews, conversations with global leaders, icons, and alternative voices shaping our times. Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera.
Business Latest is brought to you by Taiwan Excellence. Go healthy with Taiwan. Business Latest is brought to you by Taiwan Excellence. Go healthy with Taiwan.
Hello, I'm Pranayberg. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Our top stories.
I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
U.S. President Donald Trump criticizes a recent Israeli strike on Beirut, calling it vicious and too much. Iran's foreign minister says further negotiations with the U.S. will be in 2 stages and that Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon is an essential part. At the same time, Israel launches more drone attacks in southern Lebanon, killing at least 4 people. Also coming up, Argentina fans are counting down to the first appearance of Lionel Messi and his team at the World Cup. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized Israel's military actions in Lebanon. He called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to act responsibly. And Iran has said new Israeli strikes on Lebanon would be regarded as a violation of the agreement with the U.S. Now, President Trump announced a memorandum of understanding to end the war with Iran just before arriving in France for the G7 summit. James Bass reports.
Around the table, G7 leaders with the presidents of the United Arab Emirates and Egypt and the Emir of Qatar. This annual meeting addresses the big issues in the world, but for more than 3 months, one thing has dominated both global politics and economics: the war in Iran.
This is a very important deal. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Earlier, Trump had met with the Emir to thank Qatar for its diplomatic efforts that helped push the interim deal over the line. Trump said in a way there had been regime change, with Iran already losing 2 sets of leaders.
And we're dealing with people that I think are very rational people. I mean, they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people. I think actually they're smarter than the first and second group. But they're not radicalized, and they're, looking to help their country.
Trump suggested again that Syria could be asked to intervene to disarm Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there was further stinging criticism of Israel, particularly over the attack on Beirut just hours before the deal was agreed.
I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was too much. You can do too much also. But we've had a very effective relationship. Without us, without the United States, there would be no Israel.
Some of Trump's comments, critical of Israel and somewhat positive about Iran's new leadership, will make it harder for him to sell his deal at home, particularly as he's now said here at the G7 that he's considering sending his proposals to Congress for review. Those attending this summit are largely supportive of the interim peace plan, but there are many in Israel and the US who are strongly opposed and want to undermine it. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Publier in France.
And Iran's foreign minister says any agreement with the U.S. must include the release of frozen assets, sanctions relief, and Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon.
The first phase is to end the war, the Strait of Hormuz, the naval blockade, and the other topics related to freeing the frozen assets of Iran, the reconstruction. Every other topic that is related will be dealt with through talks and negotiations for the coming 60 days, until we reach a final agreement. During the final agreement, we'll talk about the nuclear matters and lifting the sanctions. From our perspective, the 2 sides of this agreement are America and Israel on one side, and Iran and Hezbollah on the other. The end of the war in Lebanon is an inseparable part of the complete end of the war, and the end of the war includes the end of the occupation as well.
Iran's military says Israel has violated the ceasefire in southern Lebanon 84 times in the last 2 days. It's warning that if these attacks do not end, Israel should expect a harsh response. At least 4 people have been killed in 2 separate strikes in the Nabatea district on Tuesday. 2 people were killed in a double-tap strike with a drone hitting a car in the village of Maifaidun. Another drone strike in the town of Shukin killed 2 people while injuring others who'd gathered there at the scene. Heidi Pett has the latest from Beirut.
There have been a number of deaths across southern Lebanon today, most of those concentrated in the district of Nabatea. Now, Nabatea is a large city. The district surrounding is named after it. It is home to one of the only remaining functional hospitals in southern Lebanon, and that city and the surrounding towns and villages have been the focus of quite intensive Israeli military activity over the last couple of weeks as they seek to push towards that city, seizing high ground in and around the area. And that activity hasn't actually ceased over the course of the last day. There has been drone strikes which have killed a number of people in the town of Mefadun, as you mentioned, and continued Israeli ground activity as well. They have not, it seems, withdrawn from those or any of their other positions, despite the assurances that Hezbollah says that it has received from Iran, in fact, that an Israeli withdrawal would be part of the final deal between the US and Iran. So it's not a precondition for them signing this memorandum of understanding later this week, but their understanding from their Iranian allies is that an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon should be part of the final agreement and that there would be no nuclear deal without it. Now, the other thing that Hezbollah has stressed is that their resistance would continue, they say, until that Israeli withdrawal happens and until the people of southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes.
Now, Iran has never confirmed or denied whether it's laid mines in the Strait of Hormuz. However, the United States and security experts have often said that the middle of the strait is potentially the site of thousands of sea mines. And that uncertainty alone has been enough to keep ships from crossing. Perrier Wilton explains.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the Strait of Hormuz will reopen for business on Friday. But that's easier said than done. There are several challenges, including verifying whether there are naval mines in the strait, and if there are, clearing them. To understand just how hard it is to fully reopen the strait, we've got to understand the strait itself. And to do that, we're going to take a look at the central part of the Strait of Hormuz. Here you can see the cut-off part of Oman. Here there are a number of islands in the strait, including Oman's Jazira Tadmor, which we're going to come back to later, and Iran. If you measure the distance across the strait here, it's around 90 kilometers, which is a large area for Iran to have to completely block off. But it didn't have to do it completely because just before the war started, oil was coming out and natural gas as well coming in through the central part of the Strait of Hormuz, away from the coast. Now, Iran designated this area a hazardous area, and many believe that this part is littered with sea mines. Let's take a closer look and have a look at this island here, because you're going to see it here. Oman, Jazira Tadmor, and Iran. This is a cross-section of the Strait of Hormuz, and this is the most important part, this hazardous area declared by Iran. The vertical scale on this map is exaggerated, but that's to show how shallow the water is here. It's partly why it's believed mines could have been placed here. And this is what the mines could look like. The international group Collective Awareness to Unexploded Ordnance says these mines are part of Iran's arsenal. They say it includes the Iranian Maham 3. It's a naval mine which can be moored to the bottom. You can see the long chain there, and the mine just floats just beneath the surface. A ship doesn't even need to hit it for it to detonate. It can blow up even when the ship is just 3 meters away. There are other types of mines too, and together, analysts say it's believed thousands could have been placed in the strait. So, how do you clear sea mines like these? Well, analysts say that one option is to use a specialized ship like this one. The UK's RFA Lime Bay. It's designed to deploy autonomous drones to find and detonate the mines. But not only is this process expensive and dangerous, some analysts say it won't be quick either. And an example of that is here. the head of the Iranian Merchant Mariners Syndicate. He says that just safety verifications for ships mean it could take 40 to 50 days before large ships feel safe to transit again. He went on to say high insurance costs and lingering distrust could also potentially delay a full reopening of the strait for up to 8 months.
And with the Straits of Hormuz mostly shut to maritime traffic and operations in the Red Sea hampered, many large shipping firms have been forced to reroute their vessels at huge extra costs. Now, new figures suggest that there's actually been a huge drop as well in cargo volume since late February. Dominic Kane reports from the port of Hamburg.
They call the port of Hamburg a gateway to the world, and every year more than 110 million tons of cargo are shipped through here, connecting the world with Northern and Central Europe and, of course, vice versa. Except that this year is slightly different because the volume of traffic to this port and to others across Northern Europe is down on what it should be, say researchers. They say the war in Iran has had a direct effect. And the companies who've been most exposed to that, well, of course, it's the companies that do the shipping. Specifically, two companies stand out, Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk. Hapag-Lloyd say that having to reroute their shipping away from the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea is costing them around $50 million every week, whereas Maersk says that it's allowing for $500 million worth of extra costs per month. Clearly, it is hitting them, and they're passing those costs on to their customers, which obviously feeds into the Northern European and Central European economies, just a side effect of the war in Iran. And the pain financially for them will not go away with a ceasefire or with a more enduring cessation of violence in the war in Iran, because they say that to reactivate those routes will take a considerable period of time. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, in the port of Hamburg.
The G7 summit has started in France with leaders discussing the issue of Iran. But Ukraine has also been a focus of this meeting. President Volodymyr Zelensky joined world leaders for talks to try to persuade U.S. President Donald Trump to support Kyiv. Natasha Butler reports.
Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump were not sitting next to each other during a meeting on Ukraine at the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains, but they did talk. Later, Trump said that Moscow should end the war.
We had a very good meeting. Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two of them. Think of it. This is on a monthly basis. They average 25,000 people, mostly soldiers, young, beautiful people. And it's crazy what's going on there. But we had a meeting, and we'll see how. I spoke with President Putin on Sunday.
The French president invited Zelensky. Emmanuel Macron wants Trump to support Ukraine. Zelensky says his meeting with G7 leaders was positive.
We spoke about battlefield. We spoke about negotiations with Russians, potential negotiations with Russia. We spoke about middle strikes and long range, the situation with Russian losses, economy, and etc. Good news, first of all, that yes, Putin has to stop this war.
While Canada and the UK promised more sanctions on the Kremlin, Germany's Chancellor offered Trump a gift, a sign that G7 allies want to project an image of unity despite the eroding transatlantic relationship. After Iran, Donald Trump says he may turn his attention to Ukraine. His G7 allies may welcome that, but they are likely to remain cautious. They won't want to be sidelined out of any future talks. And also, after 5 years of war, they'll want to make sure that peace is achieved on Kyiv's terms, not on Moscow's. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Evian-les-Bains, France.
The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo could become the worst ever. Well, that's the warning from the head of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Jean Kaseya said tens of thousands of people regarded as contacts of Ebola patients have not been part of contact tracing. He compared the current outbreak to the one in 2014 that hit Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone and killed 11,000 people. So far, the Ebola virus has killed 196 people in DR Congo. And earlier, Dr. Jean Kaseya joined me here on Al Jazeera. He said more resources are needed to get proper contact tracing data in DR Congo.
When you have one confirmed case of Ebola, and you have that in the urban area, where you have a lot of activities, trade, mining, for each person who's positive, who's tested positive, you have 40 people who are what we call contact list. Then, if you see what Uganda is doing, for 19 people, they have more than 800 contact lists. It means they are doing a great job to look for all people can be in contact directly or indirectly with those who are infected. But unfortunately, with the total of 800 cases now that we have in DRC, we are expecting 32,000 people in the contact list, but we just have 6,000. It means maybe insecurity, and also not more people on the ground to support for surveillance. That are main reasons that we are bringing together and we need to address.
And still ahead here on Al Jazeera, Sana will have the latest from the World Cup.
Yes, thank you, Pei. Argentina are ready to go, and so are their fans. The team's World Cup title defense is about to begin against Algeria.
Everything centering around the Strait of Hormuz.
Maritime transport crucial to the global economy.
Diesel up by more than 50%.
The real casualty will be the yield of the next harvest.
A 2-week ceasefire. If Iran opens the Strait of Hormuz, what more are we hearing from the Iranians?
The Strait of Hormuz will be open for transit of energy supplies.
What matters are the prices, and the key questions now going forward are going to be economic.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
On counting the cost, testing its limits. For decades, the G7 helped shape the global economy. But now the group of 7 wealthy nations is more divided than it has been in years and faces competition from major economies in Asia and beyond. So does the G7 still wield the influence it once did? Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Go healthy with Taiwan.
Hello, I'm Sana Hamouche, and 4 years on from their triumph in Qatar, Argentina are back in World Cup action. The fans are out in force in Kansas ahead of their group opener against Algeria. Unstoppable at club level, Erling Haaland is ready for his World Cup debut. And the familiar face has answered an emergency call to make his World Cup return. But right now, Senegal are taking on France in the opening match of Group I. Thousands of fans have gathered in Senegalese capital of Dakar to watch the game. Latest score with 20 minutes gone is France 0, Senegal 0. Now let's go live to Dakar, where Nicholas Hack is standing by for us. Nicholas, tell us what makes this fixture so special for Senegal fans?
Well, why isn't it not so special? You have Senegal, the winners, at least on the pitch of the Africa Cup of Nations, then the Moroccans said that contested that, but also they're playing against France, one of the top teams and the last time they played was 24 years ago during the World Cup of 2002 that was taking place in Seoul. And thousands of people gathered on this square, the square of the nation, when that game took place around 4 o'clock local time. 24 years later, the fans are back in their hundreds here watching this game. Now, Santa, I don't know if you were old enough to watch that game. I certainly was, but I can tell you most people who are here are not. They haven't seen that game, but it is a game that is talked about from one generation to another, passed on from one generation to another. That game where Senegal won against France, and it was so important because that was the first time that Senegal qualified for the World Cup, and they won against what was then the World Cup champions, France. So it is an important game tonight because the feeling among fans here is that if they can beat France tonight, then anything is possible. Sana?
So, Nick, is that their expectation? Are they expecting Senegal to win against France, or what are they hoping for?
Well, of course, they're hoping for a win. There's a lot of expectation. What's interesting among this Senegalese team, a lot of them have, since 24 years ago when there was the last game between France and Senegal, that team has evolved so much, Santa. They're well trained. They evolve in the Premiership, in the French League. Some of them are dual citizens. There's as many French Senegalese players as there are Senegalese French players, and there's a communion between these two teams. One Senegalese politician, Ousmane Sonko, said, he was asked by French TV, who does he think will win this game? And he said, Africa will win this game, because after all, this is what it's all about. This feeling that these teams that are the French team, where you have a lot of these players that are originally from African countries, and then you have these Senegalese players that have links to France, where there is a feeling of brotherhood. So there's a sense that no matter what happened, there'll be some celebrations, but we have an excellent Senegalese squad, and the coach Pape Thiaw was actually one of the forward when he played against France in 2002. So there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of hope. Every time the Senegalese go across towards the French goal, you see so much people talking, so much people applauding, and look at the people around me. People have come with their families. This is going to be a night to be remembered. Sana?
Well, Nick Hack, live from Dhaka. Thank you very much for that. We'll catch up with you later on. Now, Argentina fans have been making their presence felt at all over the United States. This is the scene in Kansas where Argentina will take on Algeria. 38-year-old Lionel Messi will be leading his country in their effort to retain the title they won in Qatar 4 years ago. Back in Argentina, fans are once again daring to dream of glory. Teresa Abel reports from Buenos Aires.
A last meeting before heading to the World Cup. Argentine fans met for a traditional barbecue on Sunday to begin a ritual of what will be Lionel Messi's last World Cup.
I think what makes us feel this World Cup the most is that it's Messi's last. I went to Qatar thinking that would be his last one. Now in the US, I'm hoping we'll make it to the final.
Argentina has started to say goodbye to a legend that is now next to Diego Maradona. Advertising of the national team, but also Lionel Messi, have taken over television ads and every corner of the streets.
For a generation of Argentinians, Lionel Messi has always been part of the national team, from the heartbreak of the lost finals to the glory of lifting the World Cup. And that's why fans say that they want to enjoy every match, every touch, every goal, because they know they're witnessing the final chapters of a remarkable international career.
But fans say there's a different feeling in this World Cup. Argentina enters the tournament not as a team chasing history, but as one trying to defend it.
We spent 30 years waiting for another World Cup to be given to us. After winning it, expectations tend to be lower. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter. As the date gets closer, one cares more and more, but with some kind of calm.
For many, the calm won't last long, as Lionel Messi and his team try to defend the title. Alejandro Casar says Argentina's team has many assets, but also many weaknesses.
We have many injuries. We have an older team. We have an older Messi. We have an older Rodrigo de Paul. Many players that are 4 years older than in Qatar.
But as in every World Cup, Argentina's fans know the team is facing a difficult challenge. But the passion for the national shirt is intact in a nation where football is more than a game. It is part of the national identity. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Well, Iraq are counting down for their first World Cup match in 40 years. They face Norway in Boston later on. Iraq will be coming up against the Premier League superstar in the shape of Erling Haaland. He'll be making his World Cup debut after scoring 16 goals in 8 qualifiers.
Of course, he's an outstanding player, and I actually adore the way he plays. I used to be a striker myself, and Haaland is just an incredible number 9. We've got to back ourselves, and what we can't do is be scared to go on the field and play against these guys.
Well, Paul Rees went to Haaland's hometown in Norway to see how one of the world's best strikers was made.
Brune was never a Viking settlement, even if its nearby beaches may have launched a longboat or two. But the Viking imagery is present, not least in connection with its famous footballing son. Erling Haaland sharpened his striker's instincts here before plundering more than 300 goals in his career so far. He now looms large in the dreams of young Norwegians.
Haaland is one of the best players in the world, probably the best, and I want to reach that goal.
In a population of 14,000, being good gets you very well known. This small Norwegian town has somehow managed to produce one of football's biggest stars. Erling Haaland has already won pretty much everything there is to win with his club. Norway qualifying for the World Cup for the first time in 28 years means he gets to test himself on the greatest stage of all. One of Haaland's former teammates at Brune FK is now head of the academy here. He says Haaland's prowess is grounded in the values of southern Norway's farming community.
You see this skinny boy coming up, he was only 14 or 15 at the time, but with a huge confidence. The way that Erling has built his career is built around hard work. It's built around the farmer's way of living, which is something that we try to transmit to the players. And that's also something that Erling's been quite vocal about as well. And I think that's something that helps to give our culture even more value, because they see that it's worth it.
That culture is very different from the Paris suburb pitches that created Kylian Mbappe or the Barcelona system that raised Lamine Yamal. This farm is where Haaland buys his milk when he's back home. Reports suggesting it's the secret behind his powerful physique are, so far, unconfirmed.
Erling is a totally down-to-earth, warm, normal Brune guy. You need to eat properly to play sport at the highest level. I'm not sure how much milk he drinks, but he buys 5 or 6 liters when he comes.
What is likely is that Norwegian footballing values would have given Haaland a good chance in life, even if he'd never made it to the top.
We have only 3 rules. You have to be on time, try to do your best, and you have to behave. And if you do that day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, then you can achieve quite exciting thing.
Quite exciting is one way of describing Haaland's goal-scoring record. Norway will hope it's just a taster of what's to come at his first World Cup. Paul Rees, Al Jazeera, Brune, Norway.
Iran's coach says they are the most oppressed team at the World Cup. They twice had to fight from behind to draw 2-2 with New Zealand in the politically charged opening match in Los Angeles. Iran say they expected to... And a familiar face will be back at the World Cup for Tunisia's second group game. Hervé Renard has answered the call to take over. Tunisia fired Sabri Lemouchi following the team's 5-1 loss against Sweden. Renard was in charge of Saudi Arabia at the last World Cup. And that's all your World Cup news for now. Do stay with us here at Al Jazeera. My colleague Per will be back with the latest news headlines after counting the cost.
Head-to-head returns from Conway Hall in London, where I will be challenging former Pentagon official David DeRoche on whether the war with Iran has been a decisive success or a costly failure. And I'll ask Maximilian Krah, MP for Germany's far-right AfD, if his party's rhetoric on immigration, Islam, German identity poses a threat to liberal democracy. Join us for Head to Head on Al Jazeera.
I'm Tom McRae. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your look at the world of business and economics. Testing its limits, the group of 7 wealthy nations is more divided than it has been in years. From trade to security, rifts have emerged between what have traditionally been close allies. Can they still find common ground? For decades, it helped shape the global economy. The G7 faces competition from major economies in Asia and beyond. Does the group still wield the influence it once did, or is the balance of power shifting elsewhere? Well, for nearly half a century, the G7 has helped shape the global order. But today's world looks very different from the one it was created to lead. Economic influence is becoming more dispersed. New centres of power are emerging. Trade tensions are rising. Decades-long alliances are under strain. And questions are growing about whether the institutions that shaped the post-World War II order are still fit for purpose. This week, its leaders meet for their annual summit in the French lakeside resort of Evian. But can the G7 still set the agenda or merely react to a world it no longer leads? Fintan Monahan reports.
Leaders of some of the world's largest economies are meeting in the place where it all began. The first G6 summit happened in France in 1975. Now, more than half a century later, what is now the G7 gathers to face new challenges in a changing world. Host French President Emmanuel Macron says he's confident that the group can still make a difference.
We must succeed in finding consensus to move forward on less contentious issues and create the elements of cooperation that make this G7 worthwhile. And I think that on major crises, as well as on issues of partnership or rebalancing of the macroeconomic model, this G7 should enable progress.
Core items on the agenda include confronting the economic challenge of China. Beijing produces far more goods than it consumes and is flooding Western markets. Europe is particularly concerned. The EU ran a trade deficit with China of more than $350 billion in 2025. China also dominates the production of rare earth minerals. These key inputs are used in many high-tech products, from batteries to fighter jets. G7 nations are determined to build alternative supply chains. Members will also be pushing for consensus on global security challenges. European powers want a united front against Russia and its war on Ukraine, while the US administration wants support for its strategy on Iran. But much has changed over the years. In the year 2000, this is how the economies of the G7 nations stacked up. The US has always been the largest in the group. But this is what they look like today. The US has become even more economically dominant. The G7 is also less united than it was in the past. Last year, US President Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on rivals and allies alike. Tough negotiations over trade deals followed, as Trump sought to fulfill his election promise of putting America first. There's also been disagreement over the war in Iran, with Trump accusing allies of not providing sufficient support. G7 powers are seeking unity in the face of global economic and security challenges. But to have a meaningful impact, they may first have to overcome their own divisions. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
So who is part of the G7? The group is made up of the United States, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and Canada. The European Union is also represented. It first met in 1975 as the G6, with Canada joining the following year. The meeting brought together the major economies that were outside the communist bloc. Its aim was to coordinate action on global economic challenges. It became the G8 in 1996 when Russia joined the club, but went back to 7 members after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The combined GDP of the G7 is more than $50 trillion. That's around 44% of the global economy, but it represents less than 10% of the world's population. Well, for more on this, let's bring in our guest now. From Milan is Fabrizio Pagani. He is a partner at Vitali, a business consultancy firm, a former senior advisor to the Italian Prime Minister, and he also served as Italy's G20 representative. In Kuala Lumpur is Fa Kim Beng. He is the director of the Institute of International and ASEAN Studies at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. And in Brussels is Guntram Wolf. He is an economist and senior fellow at Bruegel, a European think tank specialising in geoeconomics. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Counting the Cost. We really do appreciate your time. Fabrizio, if I can begin with you. The G7 was started more than 50 years ago. That is a world that clearly no longer exists. Do you believe that it is still fit for purpose, or has it just become a talk fest that's really lost the power and influence that it once had?
Well, from an economic point of view, of course, the aggregate GDP of the G7 is not the one it was vis-a-vis the global economy, but it's still quite relevant in many areas. I would say that, for example, if you look at the financial sector, the major capital markets, the most liquid, the most dynamic capital markets are still in G7 countries. Of course, the United States first, but also Europe, Japan. If you look at the currencies, the G7 currencies are still the reserve currencies of the world by almost 100%. And also in technology, there is still a lot of technology innovation, and and probably the most advanced one in G7 country. So I think there is still a very important economic weight carried by the G7.
Okay, Guntram, can we bring you in here? I just want to talk about the influence that the G7 still maintains. Where do you think its power lies in 2026?
Well, I mean, the economic, technological and financial importance of the G7 is still very significant. Now, the crucial question whether or not the G7 actually carries its weight is about whether it's united or not. I mean, if it is not united, then, of course, its influence in the world is relatively limited. If it is united, there will be still repercussions for the rest of the world that are significant. And let me just give you one very concrete example. I mean, the one big issue that is being discussed in Evian at the G7 meeting is exactly the rebalancing of the global economy. And I think both the United States as well as the European Union, and by the way, also many emerging markets, do feel that there is a significant imbalance in the global economy and that Chinese manufacturing has grown too much and that the exports of advanced manufacturing goods from China have really become a major issue for the global economy. And so where we do not agree yet between Europe and the United States is how to best approach this. But the analysis that there is an issue, I think, is shared on both sides. And so now the question for me is, will they agree on some sort of a joint up strategy vis-a-vis China? If the G7 does, it will have some implications. It will give some leverage to help rebalance the global economy.
And we'll get into that a little later in this program. Fa Kim Beng, if I can bring you in, from an Indo-Pacific point of view, how is the G7 viewed there? Is it still setting the rules of the global economic agenda, or is it being led now by the Chinese and other major players in the South?
Well, insofar as Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific are concerned, the role of Japan in G7 is actually significant in the sense that it's the only Asian country that is actually in the club. But then having said so, China has also become the largest economic power in the world in terms of purchasing price parity. And as a result of which, you now have China urging G7 to play by the rules. In other words, to be pro-trade, to be pro-international law. So you have sort of something amounting to a paradox in a context in which China is not part of G7, but China appeals to G7 to be more rational or more commonsensical in terms of its approach to world affairs.
That's obviously very self-serving to China as well by doing that. Before we move on to a few other issues, Fabrizio, I want to talk about one thing that the G7 has been united on. It really threw everything it could after Russia invaded Ukraine. Sanctions, frozen assets, financial isolation, yet Russia is still fighting today. What does that tell us about the limits of the economic pressure it can exert as a tool to influence?
It can tell us that sanctions have limits on what they can achieve. They can constrain, but they cannot compel. One point perhaps I would stress is that Russia prepared a long time before the invasion in order to be insulated from the global economy, and so to shield its economy from sanctions, which were quite foreseeable. So I think the Russian case is quite peculiar, and Russia has done indeed a good job to make the economy, to keep the economy running, notwithstanding the sanctions. However, the Russian economy is definitely in a worse shape today than it was before the war.
OK, well, when the G7 was established, its members included all the largest economies outside the communist bloc. But today, major powers are emerging in Asia that are outside the group. As we mentioned, China is the world's second largest economy. It's often been critical of the G7, and the group's summits often frame Beijing as a rival or a competitor rather than a partner. India has also emerged as one of the world's leading economies. It's frequently been invited to attend the G7 as a guest, but has never been offered membership. Others, like South Korea and Indonesia, are also growing in economic clout, further evidence that Asia may deserve a greater say in global economic decision-making. Okay, Farkan Beng, China, the world's largest economy when it comes to purchasing power. It leads in advanced manufacturing, clean energy, digital technology. Can the G7 really discuss the future of the global economy without China at this point? Or does China's absence really highlight the limits of the G7 right now?
If I'm not mistaken, China at one stage was invited to be part of G7, but China politely declined. And there are two reasons why China declined to be a part of G7. One is because as and when you become one of the G7 members, you have to comply to the obligations of the OECD, say the pledge against corruption. And you also have to make your capital exchange convertible according to the free market, both of which are not completely aligned with what China wants to do across the world, or perhaps China cannot do them. But then having said so, the weight of Chinese economy has grown tremendously. Even if China is not growing significantly, if at all, it also has a drag effect on the rest of the world economy. Or if China overproduces, such as giving rise to the problem of surplus capacity, that also leads to the problems that are confronting G7, if not the rest of the world right now.
Right. Guntram, as we've talked about, China produces far more than it consumes, and there's great concern that it's been flooding Western markets. The EU ran a trade deficit with China of more than $350 billion in 2025. How worried is Europe about the expansion of China right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general tendency is that the worry has increased a lot in Europe in the last years, and I think it is important that we have a serious debate and get this right. I mean, the Trump recipe, I think, has been rightly criticized by the rest of the world as not being conducive to rebalancing the global economy, being measures that are really quite arbitrary and, frankly speaking, not playing by the rules. So I don't think the Trump way is the right one. And this is the big disagreement between Europe and the United States. I think fundamentally the Europeans do not think that bilateral trade restrictions vis-a-vis China will help solve the macroeconomic problem that is at the base of the Chinese imbalances. So what we have to have is we have to have a serious debate about macroeconomic rebalancing, and that includes in particular the issue of the exchange rate of China. The renminbi is, according to IMF estimates, undervalued by something like 20%. And that is a major issue. And by the way, if China appreciated by 20%, also its share in the global economy measured in US dollars would be much, much bigger than what the numbers actually at the moment suggest. So we have to address the macroeconomic imbalance, the undervaluation of the Chinese renminbi, and we cannot deal with this with sort of arbitrary flouting of global trading rules, because that doesn't really achieve the goal. It might build some leverage, but it doesn't achieve the goal of really rebalancing the global economy.
Okay, Fabrizio, what do you think needs to change here? Because many argue that the G7 needs fundamental reform, maybe bring in new members, broaden its scope. Others say that that's just going to dilute it beyond being useful, that you'll never find consensus anywhere. What does it need to stay relevant?
I think, in the past, we tried to widen the G7. There was the so-called Heiligen process in 2007, 2008. But then the primary forum for international economic cooperation became the G20 after the great financial crisis in 2009, 2010. So I think each forum has his own scope and his own function. I think the G7 could stay as it is, as the forum in which the advanced economy coordinate their policies, but we would need a G20 which really works, because that's the G20 where we can discuss the global imbalances we were referring to before. And one issue which has been pointed out by Guntram is the unity of the G7. The G7 must be united in order also to bring the G7 position and standing into broader multilateral fora.
Okay, well, this is the perfect time to move on to some of the divisions within the G7 and the issues that they raise. The Canadian Prime Minister spoke ahead of the summit, reiterating his vision of a shift away from a world dominated by superpowers. Let's take a listen.
We talk in terms of variable geometry, so different partnerships with different groups of countries for different issues. Sometimes it's for outcomes, like the Coalition of the Willing, peace in Ukraine, sustainable peace in Ukraine. Often it is in bilateral relations, building up what we call strategic capabilities.
Okay, Guntram, I want to bring you back in on this. What do you make of Carney's comments there? He appealed to leaders of what he's calling middle powers to unite and find their collective strength, the likes of Canada and Italy. Is that the smart play here, and how difficult is that?
Yeah, Mark Carney's call for middle powers to unite dates back to the Davos speech. I think it's a very, very important strategy at a moment at which the United States is increasingly looking inward, cannot be relied upon as an independent, reliable partner, and at a moment where China also pursues, really, frankly speaking, a nationalist economic strategy that is painful for the rest of the world. And so I think the European Union, Canada, many so-called middle powers actually do increasingly think about collaboration. The European Union certainly has done that in the area of trade, where there are trade agreements being forged with India, with Mercosur, with many other parts of the world. And I think the key idea is to preserve, I would say, a core of multilateralism based on rules and not just based on pure power politics. And I think that would be the aim. Now, is it going to be easy to achieve that? No, not at all. Do I think that the approach to do variable geometry is the right one? Yes, I do think so. I think for different issues, there will be different coalitions of the willing. But overall, it's far from perfect. And what the global economy actually would ideally like to see, and what we would like to see for really a global rebalancing, is some sort of a global coalition, and that was originally the G20, but I think the divisions are just too big within the G20 to really provide that kind of guidance. So the middle power option is certainly something we should pursue, certainly as Europeans and Canadians.
We obviously know that Donald Trump has upended many of his relationships with some of America's closest allies. You look at the divisions within the G7, the US tariffs, the war on Iran, NATO potentially taking over Greenland, to name just a few. Fark and Ben, when the G7 can't really agree internally, and when you see these rifts grow wider, does it then have any credibility? Does it lose some of its credibility when trying to speak to the rest of the world?
In terms of the credibility of the United States, it has definitely been significantly damaged, not only in the Atlantic or has affected the transatlantic relationship, but within the context of Indo-Pacific. Many countries in this part of the world, in Indo-Pacific, East Asia, Asia-Pacific, regardless of what you may call it, do doubt if you have someone who has that ability to lead the world in a very credible manner in the White House. And we will not be able to find out not until the results of the midterm congressional elections in November this year.
Fabrizio, the US, Donald Trump, we saw, went to Beijing not that long ago, obviously pursuing his own bilateral track with Beijing. I mean, if Washington cuts a deal with China directly, does that undermine the G7? What room is left for it to maneuver?
I think this discussion on global imbalances remains relevant, because even if the US and China find some sort of understanding, and there is a sort of accommodation between the two largest economies, we have seen that the global imbalances remain. Even if it's a bit of rebalancing between US and China, between Washington and Beijing, we've seen that Chinese exports still are surging across the global economy. This is also due to a realignment of trade and investment. So, for example, we see surge of trade goods coming from Southeast Asia or other parts of other emerging economies, thanks to not only but also thanks to Chinese investment. So it's only a bit of a veil what we see in terms of rebalancing. I think we need a serious discussion on rebalancing, as the one we had for a couple of years within the G20, with a peer review process, a mutual assessment process, and so on.
Guntram, you're obviously listening in there. Do you believe that is the way forward, that that's what needs to happen right now?
This issue, of course, is not a new issue, and it's been on the table for some time. Now, what is very difficult to establish is how the world would look if the global powers hadn't discussed this in the past, and what is the contribution of these kind of discussions to actual outcomes. I still firmly believe in the fact that it's much better if the major powers talk to each other than if they don't. Because that's a condition for peace, it's a condition for more cooperation. But let's face it, it's not easy to do this kind of macroeconomic adjustment on all sides. I mean, it's not easy for the United States to get its fiscal imbalances in check. It's not easy for China to change its growth strategy. I mean, these are very, very long-term and difficult processes, but I think both sides have to learn that if something is not sustainable long term, it's gonna collapse at some point, and then the disruptive cost is going to be much bigger. And so I would certainly urge also Chinese policymakers to seriously consider what it means if they dominate global manufacturing and destroy manufacturing in much of the rest of the world, and what kind of political instability will emerge in the rest of the world, and what are the implications of that also for the prosperity of China.
Okay.
And so in that sense, I really think we have to adjust. And again, I think also the United States has a big adjustment to do.
Okay.
And I really hope that in the midterms, there will be more reasonable people being voted into Congress to give some checks and balances to this president.
Fa Kinbing, I want to bring you in on one thing that we heard there, the pressure on China to take a look at its production, its manufacturing, and making sure it doesn't completely dominate the globe. Is there any desire from Beijing to do that?
I don't see any desire from Beijing to do that because not unlike most economies in the world, China's economy and also the economies of places such as Southeast Asia are predominantly dominated by small and medium enterprises or even micro, small and medium enterprises. And if China were to try to put out a policy that rein in their productive capability, then a lot of these companies will be affected in China first. Now, even as I'm speaking right now, there are many micro, small, and medium industries in China that cannot compete among themselves, that are flooding to Southeast Asia, if not the rest of the world, leading to what economists might call the surplus capacity problem. And that is an issue to be addressed, but I don't see China taking any significant action that can prevent the cascade of that negative externalities.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Fabrizio Pagani, former senior advisor to the Italian Prime Minister and to the Minister of Economy and Finance, served as Italy's G20 representative. Fa Kinbing, political economist and director of the Institute of International and ASEAN Studies at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. And Guntram Wolf, an economist and senior fellow at Bruegel, a European think tank specialising in geoeconomics. Thank you so much for your time and your insight here on Counting the Cost today. We really do appreciate it. And that is it for our show. You can get in touch with us on X at TomMcRae_NZ. Do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. Well, that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Tom McRae, and from the whole team, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for our next show, where we explore whether BRICS, the Global South, and other emerging blocs are reshaping the balance of economic power. The news on Al Jazeera is next.
Frank assessments. The Board of Peace was not put in place to bring peace to the world, to liberate the Palestinian people. None of those things exist in all the literature that was put forward about the Board of Peace. Informed opinions.
Don't you think that North Korea has proven that if you do have nuclear weapons, that the United States won't mess with you?
Absolutely. We see that demonstrated in North Korea and negatively in the case of Libya with Gaddafi, who was ousted after abandoning his nuclear program.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
In every story, truth is priority. Beyond the headlines, providing context, insight, and meaning. Seeking balance in every narrative we cover. Al Jazeera, from the front lines to the newsroom, to you.
In this world, some children grow up surrounded by family, while others grow up learning how to live without one. Since 2017, your donations have reached orphans with care that protects their dignity. Across 15 countries, Hands for Charity stands beside orphans, offering support that truly changes lives. Sponsor an orphan today and become part of their future.
The cloud of nuclear war looms ever present.
What if this is the beginning of one of those accidental nuclear wars? What if this is the beginning of the end of life as we know it?
From the horrors of recent history to the rising current threat, Apocalypse Maybe discovers the impact nuclear weapons have on humanity.
Our failure to keep humanity safe is siphoning down to the individual on the street.
This is not a drill on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Pran Iberg. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Our top stories.
I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
U.S. President Donald Trump criticizes a recent Israeli strike on Beirut, calling it vicious and too much. At the same time, Israel launches more drone attacks in southern Lebanon, killing at least 4 people. Also ahead, the push for peace at the G7 summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meets with Donald Trump in an effort to gain more support. And Africa's top health agency warns the Ebola outbreak in DR Congo could be the worst ever. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized Israel's military actions in Lebanon. He called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to act responsibly. And Iran says any new Israeli strikes on Lebanon would be regarded as a violation of the agreement with the U.S. And just before arriving in France for the G7 summit, President Trump announced a memorandum of understanding to end the war with Iran. James Bass reports.
Around the table, G7 leaders with the presidents of the United Arab Emirates and Egypt and the Emir of Qatar. This annual meeting addresses the big issues in the world, but for more than 3 months, one thing has dominated both global politics and economics: the war in Iran.
This is a very important deal. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Earlier, Trump had met with the Emir to thank Qatar for its diplomatic efforts that helped push the interim deal over the line. Trump said in a way there had been regime change, with Iran already losing 2 sets of leaders.
And we're dealing with people that I think are very rational people. I mean, they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people. I think actually they're smarter than the first and second group. But they're not radicalized, and they're, looking to help their country.
Trump suggested again that Syria could be asked to intervene to disarm Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there was further stinging criticism of Israel, particularly over the attack on Beirut just hours before the deal was agreed.
I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was a vicious, that was too much. You can do too much also. But we've had a very effective relationship. Without the United States, there would be no Israel.
Some of Trump's comments, critical of Israel and somewhat positive about Iran's new leadership, will make it harder for him to sell his deal at home, particularly as he's now said here at the G7 that he's considering sending his proposals to Congress for review. Those attending this summit are largely supportive of the interim peace plan, but there are many in Israel and the US who are strongly opposed and want to undermine it. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Publier in France.
And Iran's military says Israel has violated the ceasefire in southern Lebanon 84 times in the last 2 days. It's warning that if these attacks don't end, Israel should expect a harsh response. At least 4 people have been killed in 2 separate strikes in the Nabatea district on Tuesday. 2 people were killed in a double tap strike, with a drone hitting a car in the village of Maifadun. Another drone strike on the town of Shukin killed 2 people while injuring others who'd gathered there at the scene. Heidi Pett has the latest from Beirut.
There have been a number of deaths across southern Lebanon today, most of those concentrated in the district of Nabatea. Now, Nabatea is The large city, the district surrounding, is named after it. It is home to one of the only remaining functional hospitals in southern Lebanon, and that city and the surrounding towns and villages have been the focus of quite intensive Israeli military activity over the last couple of weeks as they seek to push towards that city, seizing high ground in and around the area. And that activity hasn't actually ceased over the course of the last day. There has been drone strikes which have killed a number of people in the town of Mefadun, as you mentioned, and continued Israeli ground activity as well. They have not, it seems, withdrawn from those or any of their other positions, despite the assurances that Hezbollah says that it has received from Iran, in fact, that an Israeli withdrawal would be part of the final deal between the US and Iran. So it's not a precondition for them signing this memorandum of understanding later this week, but their understanding from their Iranian allies is that an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon should be part of the final agreement and that there would be no nuclear deal without it. Now, the other thing that Hezbollah has stressed is that their resistance would continue, they say, until that Israeli withdrawal happens and until the people of southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes.
Now let's bring in Doug Bandow. He is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute and a former special assistant to U.S. President Ronald Reagan. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Doug, good to see you. We're about 3 days away now from the official signing ceremony in Bergenstock in Switzerland. And those tensions between Israel and Iran, they are certainly still there over what's happening over in Lebanon. Do you think there's a risk that this could actually turn into a problem for this deal?
Oh, definitely. Benjamin Netanyahu would prefer to stop the deal, so he has an incentive to actually take military action. Now, I believe that both the Iranian leadership and President Trump want the deal to go forward, so they've got to take that into consideration. And the president certainly has been talking tough to Netanyahu. So, but we don't know what's going to happen. 3 days is a long time, frankly, in the Middle East and in negotiations like this.
And of course, on Friday, it said that the Strait of Hormuz is going to reopen. But obviously, Iran still has that capability to close it using very small means. I mean, this leverage, the power to sort of hurt the global economy that Iran now has actually tested in a real world scenario. Do you think that changes the sort of future power dynamics in the region?
Very definitely. What this tells Iran is that it actually has other weapons besides a nuclear weapon. Now, it may make Iran more willing to negotiate away its nuclear weapon, but it's also going to want something as compensation. And I think that's going to be clearly sanctions relief, unfrozen money, maybe a transit fee. This has transformed the region. And Iran, suddenly has a lot of leverage that everyone thought maybe they had, but this war has proved it.
And do you think that that makes this sort of future French and British mission to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz that much more difficult?
Absolutely. The United States did not want to send its ships anywhere close to the Iranian coast. It was worried about the potential of being hit by Iranians. I think Britain and France, they have competent navies, but they aren't that large, and they aren't terribly interested in risking the lives of their people in a place where the United States didn't want to do so. So I think they're going to approach this very carefully and in consultation with Iran.
This deal that's now going to be signed on Friday, which according to J.D. Vance is about a page and a half, setting the stage for 60 days of negotiations to start on Friday. Compare that, Doug, to the 159-page document of the JCPOA, negotiated over 20 months between Iran and the P5+1. Do you think that Trump's new deal is actually that much better than the old one, like he claims?
No, not at all. Now, of course, the enriched uranium wouldn't even be there if President Trump had not gotten rid of the old deal. Unfortunately, the option was to, negotiate and expand the old deal. I think that probably would have gotten us to a better point. The challenge today is, can you do in 2 months what it took so much longer to do, in the previous administration? And that's going to require a serious technical effort. It's going to require negotiators who know the issues. This is not going to be easy. It's good the shooting has stopped, but there's still a long road ahead of us to get a genuine settlement that's likely to last.
Doug Bandow, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. So good to hear your analysis on the program. Thank you so much. Now, Iran has never confirmed or denied whether it's actually laid mines in the Strait of Hormuz. However, the United States and security experts have often said that in the middle of the strait, well, that's potentially the site of thousands of sea mines. And that uncertainty alone has been enough to keep ships from crossing. Perry Wilton explains.
US President Donald Trump says the Strait of Hormuz will reopen for business on Friday. But that's easier said than done. There are several challenges, including verifying whether there are naval mines in the strait, and if there are, clearing them. To understand just how hard it is to fully reopen the strait, we've got to understand the strait itself. And to do that, we're going to take a look at the central part of the Strait of Hormuz. Here you can see the cut-off part of Oman. Here there are a number of islands in the strait, including Oman's Jasirat Tadmor, which we're going to come back to later, and Iran. If you measure the distance across the strait here, it's around 90 kilometers, which is a large area for Iran to have to completely block off. But it didn't have to do it completely because just before the war started, oil was coming out and natural gas as well coming in through the central part of the Strait of Hormuz, away from the coast. Now, Iran designated this area a hazardous area, and many believe that this part is littered with sea mines. Let's take a closer look and have a look at this island here, because you're going to see it here. Oman, Jasirat Tadmor, and Iran. This is a cross-section of the Strait of Hormuz, and this is the most important part, this hazardous area declared by Iran. The vertical scale on this map is exaggerated, but that's to show how shallow the water is here. It's partly why it's believed mines could have been placed here. And this is what the mines could look like. The international group Collective Awareness to Unexploded Ordnance says these mines are part of Iran's arsenal. They say it includes the Iranian Maham 3. It's a naval mine which can be moored to the bottom. You can see the long chain there, and the mine just floats just beneath the surface. A ship doesn't even need to hit it for it to detonate. It can blow up even when the ship is just 3 meters away. There are other types of mines too, and together, analysts say it's believed thousands could have been placed in the strait. So, how do you clear sea mines like these? Well, analysts say that one option is to use a specialized ship like this one. The UK's RFA Lime Bay. It's designed to deploy autonomous drones to find and detonate the mines. But not only is this process expensive and dangerous, some analysts say it won't be quick either. And an example of that is here. The head of the Iranian Merchant Mariners Syndicate. He says that just safety verifications for ships mean it could take 40 to 50 days before large ships feel safe to transit again. He went on to say high insurance costs and lingering distrust could also potentially delay a full reopening of the strait for up to 8 months.
Now, with the Strait of Hormuz mostly shut to maritime traffic and operations in the Red Sea hampered, many large shipping firms have been forced to reroute their vessels at huge extra costs. These longer journeys and fewer loads delivered have started to affect ports in northern Europe. And new figures suggest that there's been a drop in cargo volume since late February. Dominic Kane reports now from the port of Hamburg.
They call the port of Hamburg a gateway to the world, and every year more than 110 million tons of cargo are shipped through here, connecting the world with Northern and Central Europe and, of course, vice versa. Except that this year is slightly different because the volume of traffic to this port and to others across Northern Europe is down on what it should be, say researchers. They say the war in Iran has had a direct effect. And the companies who've been most exposed to that, well, of course, it's the companies that do the shipping. Specifically, 2 companies stand out, Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk. Hapag-Lloyd say that having to reroute their shipping away from the Strait Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea is costing them around $50 million every week, whereas Maersk says that it's allowing for $500 million worth of extra costs per month. Clearly it is hitting them, and they're passing those costs on to their customers, which obviously feeds into the Northern European and Central European economies, just a side effect of the war in Iran. And the pain financially for them will not go away with a ceasefire or with a more enduring cessation of violence in the war in Iran, because they say that to reactivate those routes will take a considerable period of time. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, in the port of Hamburg.
And still ahead here on Al Jazeera.
There's no hope right now, and it's hard to motivate kids to continue at school when there's no guarantee of a job afterwards.
South Africa's economic future demand change as they continue to struggle with unemployment.
When the Taliban arrived first in Afghanistan, life for the women of Afghanistan stopped completely. It's about their rights, not to go to school, to have a job, nothing.